just what is a perfect campsite? The answer to that question is as varied as the people who seek it. For some, camping up in a manicured park within snoring distance of the neighbouring caravan is fine. But for those who really want to get away from it all and enjoy the real splendour of Australia, it's time to get off-road. And for that, you'll need a genuine off-road caravan. The search for that perfect campsite will mean traversing a wide range of terrain types. This journey would prove the perfect off-road test for the Nova Terra Sportz.
G'day, I'm Anthony Kilner and we're here with the new Nova Terra Sportz to see what this off-road caravan can do in extreme outback conditions. Robert Cataldo from Nova told us to test the van in sand, in dirt, in ruts, the lot. We're doing a run up the Darling River in temperatures of 40 plus every day, and we're going to see how this van can handle these sorts of conditions.
The Nova Terra Sportz is the ideal RV for those who want to enjoy the comfort and style of a touring caravan, with the knowledge that they can go off-road with complete confidence. The Terra Sportz has been designed from the ground up to handle genuine off-road situations, not just graded dirt roads. Our eager crew of Anthony and Jane hit the road with the Terra Sportz and headed for the bush. To get off-road, you need to travel on-road first. And the Terra Sportz handled this aspect of touring equally well. It towed well at highway speeds on the blacktop and also performed well on dirt roads, handling corrugations and bull dust with ease. One vitally important factor with dirt road travel is dust in the van. The last thing a traveller needs is to arrive in a campsite to find their van coated in a fine layer of dust. The Nova design team addressed this problem by installing a scupper in the roof, which pressurises the interior of the van so dust just can't get in. After hundreds of kilometres of dirt and dust, the interior of the Terra Sportz was as clean as a whistle.
That's good, nothing's moved. That's it for the dust.
Leaving the dirt roads behind, the crew began following rough side tracks, poking into likely spots well away from the roads. The weather grew hotter, topping 40 degrees C, so a campsite by a billabong began to grow in appeal. Some of the tracks you'll find around western watercourses are pretty rough, with dips and washaways, old wheel ruts and steep gullies. But the Nova handled these well. The Alco off-road hitch showed good articulation, and the cutaway rear of the caravan made exiting the deeper gullies pretty comfortable. Another noticeable feature was the performance of the Simplicity load-sharing independent suspension. In the steep gullies there was loads of travel and the suspension handled the rough terrain easily. There were some steep climbs in the area, and aside from kicking up a lot of dust, there were no problems with the Terra Sportz. The braking system on the van proved its worth on some of the descents, holding the entire rig steady as it eased down the steeper slopes. With the weather getting still hotter and the billabong camps not so attractive, the crew headed across to the Darling River for an overnight stay. Not the perfect campsite they were seeking, but nice all the same. At this point in time, the river was rising, flowing nicely past the camp, though a dip in the river was first on the list. Setting up camp in the Terra Sportz was very easy, and the real beauty of an off-road van is that you can take some serious home comforts with you. The interior of the Nova Terra Sportz is comfortable and practical. Forward kitchen with a shower toilet in the driver's side corner. The Thetford 184 litre 3-way fridge and more bench space lay amidships opposite the dinette, with the bedroom at the rear. A 3-way folding table in the dinette provided a bit of practical space saving. And when folded for travel, Velcro straps held it securely in place. Big windows with insect screens allowed plenty of natural light and ventilation, while built-in screens added privacy. An air conditioning system in the roof will cool things down if power is available. The interior finish was first class, and it was noticeable that nothing had moved around so far during the trip, even after some of that rough country. All the trims were neat and tidy, and the cupboard and locker latches obviously secure enough to handle rough going. One of the good things about the Terra Sportz is its independent camping ability. In bush camps, power is supplied by a battery bank with a solar panel up on the roof to boost charging capability. Twin 9-kilo gas cylinders provide a substantial reserve for in-van cooking. There's plenty of water storage in the twin 80-litre underfloor tanks, and these tanks are shielded with galvanised plate to protect them in rough country. No matter how far away from the power grid you are, you'll still have all the amenities on board the Terra Sportz. The next morning it was back on the dirt, heading roughly along the river. Mornings bring out the best in the wildlife, so it pays to keep your wits about you. Roos and wallabies were common here, and the emus don't mind crossing roads either. The appeal of a perfect river camp was still strong, but the further Anthony and Jane travelled, the more the river rose. They headed for a campsite that looked beaut on the maps, but when they arrived, the river had topped the banks and was flooding the area. Water over tracks can be tricky to cross, but after a quick check of the depth and making sure the bottom was solid, the Terra Sportz crew pushed through easily. A riverside stopover for a cuppa became decision time. Do we continue looking for a campsite on a rising river, or do we look elsewhere? According to the maps, there was some sandy country nearby, so the crew headed that way for a look-see. Here they encountered narrow tracks through trees and stretches of sandy track through low desert scrub. This was quite pleasant country, though very hot, and the sandy going proved no problem for the Terra Sportz. But remember those tyre pressures.
On the bitumen, we'd run these tyres at around 36 psi. Once we get into sand, we need them at about 18, possibly lower. And don't forget, once you get back on the bitumen, you've got to pump them back up again.
Soft sand can be a challenge even to a four-wheel drive, but with careful driving, the van rolled along quite easily. And then came the sandhill. In all things, sometimes Murphy's Law kicks in, and an extremely soft dune had the Terra Sportz stopped. But only momentarily. A bit of judicious recovery work had the rig back on the harder sand and ready to continue. None the worse for the experience.
Okay, let's go.
Oh, look at that, walking it out.
That's it, follow it, Ant.
The exercise did show, however, that it's wise to travel in company with another four-wheel drive rig when traversing genuinely rough country, even if it's just a film crew in an old troopy. With the sandy country not producing the perfect campsite they were seeking, and with Menindee not far away, the crew decided to overnight there. Some of the lake country around Menindee is pretty spectacular, and the crew followed some backtracks to take in the sights. Some of these tracks were a bit on the rough side, certainly not for the faint-hearted, and definitely no place for an ordinary caravan. were a few possible campsites in this area, but none that made the grade as perfect, so the crew headed for a more formal camp in the van park on Menindee Lake. On the way, a quick look at the main weir showed that finding a perfect riverside camp was going to be a challenge. Thousands of megalitres were pouring through the weir gates, thundering downstream and lifting river levels. The van park at Menindee was fine, but it was far from the remote campsite the crew were after. With the water on the rise, their river camp options were fading fast, so they were convinced west was the way to go. The following morning it was back on the tar, heading west through Broken Hill and the historic former ghost town of Silverton. At a lookout just outside Silverton, there's a magnificent view of the Mundi Plain. Here the crew set up for a cuppa and admired the view. This is incredibly flat country, bordered to the east by a range of rugged hills. To the west, the plain disappeared into the horizon, out into South Australia. Then it was time to leave the tar and head down onto the red dirt roads of the plain. Here and there the road dipped down into creek beds, dry when we passed, but a big wet could have made life interesting. A creek and gorge way back in the hills looked promising, so the Terra Sportz said farewell to the red dirt roads and headed bush, following the creek bed into increasingly rugged country. Now the van would be put to its most severe test. This was trackless, rough, rocky country, with soft sandy creek beds interspersed with jutting rocks, logs, tangled branches and overhanging trees. Certainly no place for anything other than a genuine off-road caravan. With so many jagged rocks and branches along this route, any cabling, pipework or other structures hanging down underneath a van would soon be snagged or simply torn off. The clean underside of the Terra Sportz showed its practicality here. The whole underside was plate protected and the gusseted frame provided added strength in this rugged country. This trackless gorge country provided a real test for any suspension system. And the simplicity, load-sharing, independent spring and A-arm design on the Terra Sportz walked the van over some seriously rocky terrain without problems. Its long travel allowed the wheels to track securely over boulders, and the high clearance of the van kept the body clear of damage. After a while it became obvious that the crew's perfect campsite lay elsewhere. The gorge narrowed, the rocky terrain became much tougher, and the sand of the creek bed more treacherous. Heat also became an issue. With the temperature climbing well above the 40 mark, it was time to turn around and find a better location. Outside the creek gorge on a grassy flat, Anthony checked out the suspension after that rough treatment.
This suspension has passed with flying colours. Rock, mud, sand, terrain has done an amazing job. It always pays though to have a look at your suspension.
We also took time out in the shade of the awning to assess the journey so far. Anthony, I haven't seen you since we were playing on that sandhill. How's this van gone?
Look, it's been pretty amazing, Gil. We had to change plans. We've gone from heading up the Darling River, got flooded, couldn't go up there, so we headed west, and we've come out the back of Broken Hill, and it's been amazing. It's done everything that I was expecting of it, and in some cases a lot more.
How about the suspension?
Suspension's pretty amazing. Watching the articulation between those two wheels as you're tracking over rocks and through washaways and things like that, it's not overly clunky, it's very smooth, and you know, it's worked a treat.
And how did it tow behind the cruiser? She's got a little bit of weight about her.
She's got a bit of weight, and yeah, on the odd occasion you get that little bit of rocking backwards and forwards, but you know, that with the coupling that's on this, the Alco off-road, that takes out a lot of the clunking and banging that you'd normally get on a 50mm coupling. So that's actually really quite smooth.
And you would have travelled a lot of dirt roads on the way out here, so how about dust? Is it well sealed?
The instruction from the guys at Nova was run with the scupper panel up the whole time on the dirt. And you know, we've been in there a couple of times now, and there's a little bit of dust there, not much. And when you consider the sort of wind and the extremes of heat and dust and cars coming past, it's actually very, very well dust sealed.
40-degree heat plus, you know, that tests both the tow car and the caravan.
Yeah, that's been amazing. I mean, look, I've spent a lot of time out in desert country and temperatures up to around 50 degrees in the shade. And when you're hauling a van like this, you're working it. You're working your vehicle, you're working the van, the tyres, tyre pressures go up because everything's hot, the water gets hot, everything gets stressed to the max. And so, you know, this is a really good test for it.
So the bottom line is, she handled what you threw at it.
Absolutely. And even the step, you know, which I think is probably needs to be higher, we've hit that a few times. We dragged it over some rock. It's still there.
As long as it's still there, that's the main thing.
Well, it helps get in the van, doesn't it?
That's right.
So no, it's good. It's good.
So all in all, what sort of a rating would you give her as a test drive?
Geez, it's up there, I've got to say. You know, and if Nova, the quality they put together, if it hangs in there for years of work, they won't go wrong with this package.
With the day drawing on, the crew spotted a rough track branching off into the hills. They took the chance and followed it along the edge of the range and up a steep, rocky trail. It ended on a flat plateau with a magnificent view over the Mundi Plain. And here it was. At last, Anthony and Jane had found their perfect campsite. The views from the plateau were simply magnificent, with the flat of the plain disappearing into the distant horizon. A glass of champagne made a fine toast to a magnificent sunset and to the end of a testing time for the Terra Sportz. It had handled some genuinely rough country as only a serious off-road caravan can, and came through with flying colours. If your idea of a perfect campsite demands getting off-road, out in the peace and quiet of the bush, you can be sure your new Nova Terra Sportz will get you there in style and comfort.